This week isn't just big, it's game-changing. General Hospital.
Tension hung thick in the air across General Hospital, where emotions were no longer simmering. They were dangerously close to boiling over. Jason Morgan, portrayed by Steve Burton, stood alone in a dimly lit storage unit, his thoughts racing faster than his pulse. The weight of his choices pressed heavily on him as he prepared for a decisive confrontation with Cullum, a man whose actions had placed not only Jason but also Britt Westbourne, played by Kelly Thibault, in serious danger. Yet even as Jason readied himself, memories flooded his mind, powerful, emotional echoes of the people who had shaped his life. He recalled a quiet, heartfelt conversation with Tracy Quartermaine, portrayed by Jane Elliott, in the aftermath of losing Monica Quartermaine. The grief they shared had forged an unspoken bond, one that Jason carried with him even now. Another memory surfaced, Carly Spencer, brought to life by Laura Wright, standing firm yet compassionate. She had urged him not to make promises he might not be able to keep, especially to his son, Danny. Carly had assured him she would protect the boy, offering Jason a sense of peace amid the chaos. Their connection ran deep, built on trust, loyalty, and years of shared battles. Back in the present, Jason carefully packed his gear into a duffel bag, his movements deliberate, almost mechanical. But beneath that calm exterior, a storm raged. Every step he took felt like it could lead to a point of no return. Elsewhere, Carly sat at her kitchen table, her world quietly unraveling. Across from her was Jack Brennan, played by Chris McKenna. The air between them was tense, filled with unspoken truths and lingering doubts. Carly had recently uncovered troubling information, details that suggested Jack had not been fully honest about her daughter's involvement in a dangerous organization. Determined to find clarity, she chose her words carefully, her voice steady but laced with emotion. She spoke about honesty, about how love could not truly exist without it. Jack listened, visibly conflicted. He admitted that his work had often forced him to keep secrets, even from those he cared about most. He acknowledged his shortcomings, his voice heavy with regret, insisting that his feelings for Carly were genuine despite everything. Tears welled in Carly's eyes as she leaned forward slightly, her vulnerability on full display. She explained that real love sometimes required risk, the risk of telling the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. She asked him, quietly but firmly, whether he loved her enough to take that risk. But before Jack could respond, an urgent message pulled him away. Duty called, as it so often did, leaving Carly alone with her thoughts. As the door closed behind him, the weight of disappointment settled over her, her expression revealing just how deeply she had been affected. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Lucas Jones, portrayed by Van Hansis, struggled with growing unease. He hadn't heard from Marco, played by Adrian Anchondo, and the silence was beginning to worry him. Something felt off, though he couldn't yet explain why. Far from the hospital, at Windermere, tensions were building in a different way. Sidwell, portrayed by Carlo Rota, maintained an air of control, though subtle cracks were beginning to show. His interactions with those around him hinted at deeper motivations, particularly when it came to his son, Marco. When Marco finally arrived, he carried himself with a quiet determination. After a brief exchange, he found himself alone long enough to access a secure location and retrieve 2 small vials, items that could prove critical in the days ahead. Back at the hospital, Lucas's anxiety turned to relief when Marco appeared. Without wasting time, Marco handed over the vials, urging Lucas to act quickly. There was urgency in his voice, a clear understanding that their window of opportunity was limited. He reassured Lucas, though, insisting that everything would be fine, that his father would ensure their safety. But beneath that reassurance lay uncertainty. Trust in Port Charles was never simple. At the same time, another storm was brewing. At headquarters, tensions rose as officials demanded answers regarding a recent operation that had spiraled out of control. Pressure mounted on Jack, who now found himself caught between his responsibilities and the consequences of past decisions. And then, in a moment charged with suspense, everything converged. Jason positioned himself carefully, his focus locked on his target. From his vantage point, he had a clear line of sight. But just as he steadied himself, another figure stepped into view, Jack. Now, both men stood within range. Time seemed to slow. Jason's mind raced, weighing every possible outcome. One choice could change everything, setting off a chain reaction that no one could predict. His finger hovered, his breath steady, but heavy with hesitation. And just like that, the moment hung suspended, uncertain, unresolved. As the scene faded, one question lingered above all others. What happens next? Would Jason follow through, or would he choose a different path? Could hidden truths finally come to light, or would they remain buried beneath layers of deception? And in a world where loyalty is constantly tested, who would ultimately stand, and who would fall? In Port Charles, nothing is ever simple. And sometimes the most powerful battles are the ones fought within. The silence that followed felt heavier than any confrontation. In General Hospital, moments like these often defined everything that came next, and Jason Morgan was standing right at the edge of one. His grip tightened slightly, but not out of fear. It was hesitation, rare, unfamiliar hesitation. For a man known for decisive action, even a fraction of doubt could shift the course of events. Steve Burton brought that conflict to life with quiet intensity, showing a side of Jason that few ever truly saw. Through the scope, the world narrowed. Cullum remained the intended target, the source of escalating danger. But now Jack Brennan, played by Chris McKenna, had stepped into that same fragile line. One move could solve a problem, or create two more. Jason exhaled slowly, his mind flashing once more to Danny, to Carly, to promises made without certainty of keeping them. The life he had chosen had always demanded sacrifice, but this felt different. This felt personal in a way that went beyond survival. And then he lowered the rifle. Not completely. Not decisively. Just enough to show that, for the first time in a long time, Jason was reconsidering the path in front of him. Across town, Carly Spencer sat frozen in the aftermath of her conversation. The quiet inside her home felt unnatural, like the calm after a storm that hadn't fully passed. Laura Wright captured every flicker of emotion, betrayal, hope, and something deeper that Carly herself couldn't quite name. She replayed Jack's words in her mind, searching for truth within them. He had said he loved her. But love, as Carly knew all too well, wasn't just about words. It was about choices. About honesty when it mattered most. And he had walked away. That fact lingered more than anything else. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Lucas Jones felt the weight of a secret he hadn't asked for. The vials now in his possession weren't just medicine. They were responsibility, risk, and possibly the key to saving a life. Van Hansis portrayed Lucas as a man caught between ethics and emotion, unsure which path would ultimately do the least harm. Marco, played by Adrian Anchondo, tried to maintain a sense of calm, but even he couldn't fully hide the tension beneath the surface. He had crossed a line, one that could not easily be undone. And while he trusted his father to protect him, there was an unspoken question lingering in the air. What if that trust was misplaced? At Windermere, that question began to take shape. Sidwell, portrayed by Carlo Rota, returned with a presence that immediately shifted the atmosphere. There was a quiet authority in the way he moved, a sense that he already knew more than he was letting on. When the missing vials were discovered, suspicion spread quickly. Names were considered, motives questioned, and while Lucas became an easy target in theory, Sidwell's silence suggested something deeper. He wasn't reacting, he was thinking, and that, perhaps, was far more dangerous. Back at the scene, Jason remained in position, the weight of the moment stretching longer than it should. Opportunities like this didn't last forever. Eventually, something would force his hand. And it did. A sudden movement. A shift in stance. Just enough to break the fragile stillness. Jason's instincts kicked in, but instead of pulling the trigger, he stepped back into the shadows. He had made a choice. Not one of action, but one of delay. Sometimes, waiting was the most dangerous move of all. At headquarters, the pressure on Jack intensified. Questions demanded answers, and patience was wearing thin. The consequences of recent events were beginning to ripple outward, affecting more lives than anyone had anticipated. Jack stood firm, but cracks were beginning to show. His balancing act between duty and personal connection was becoming harder to maintain. And somewhere deep down, he knew that eventually he would have to choose. There would be no more walking away. As night settled over Port Charles, every character found themselves at a crossroads. Jason, choosing restraint over impulse for now. Carly, questioning whether love without honesty was worth holding on to. Lucas, carrying a secret that could change everything. Marco, caught between loyalty and consequence. And Sidwell watching, waiting, calculating his next move. Nothing had exploded yet, but everything was set. Because in this world, it's not always the moment of action that changes lives. Sometimes it's the pause before it. And when that pause finally breaks, nothing will ever be the same again.